Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another episode of The Ghost Furnace. I am Bond, and I'm here with my cohort as always, Nick, Pennsylvania. How you doing, Nick?
It's been a real exciting week.
Yeah, it has been an exciting week for you. You've had some success recently in one of your literary endeavors, right?
I will say very briefly, because this is not exactly what we're talking about today, but I've alluded at. I've written a couple books on diatonic accordions in the past, but I've had most of this winter, and I believe I said some stuff when we were interviewing Tim Renner
Right.
about research and whatnot. I actually did somewhat of a different book on a steel guitar, the Hawaiian steel guitar, and it was a bit of a biography of a very early figure in the form of Miss Myrtle Stumpf. So I had early this week had some test copies printed out. I printed out a few dozen, and I print these out because I need something physical to. I can't just stare at a screen. I need to do my final edits on something physical. But I also send them to my publisher, and I send them out to people. And I have leftover ones that I say, anybody I thank, I send anybody I thank in the book, I send these copies to. But I always have a few left over, so I went on one of the lap steel pages just on Facebook, and I just said, hey, I did this. I don't know what sort of interest there is in this sort of thing, but I wrote this because this woman fascinates me, and I'm fascinated by early music of any kind. I always
Right, in
am thinking
general.
back, and you
Yeah.
know that about me. But it got way more attention than I had anticipated, and so just within the past 24 hours, I think three or four books have gone to Hawaii. One went to the greatest record store in the cosmos, which
Yeah.
of course is Old Paint Records
Old
in
paint.
Tucson, Arizona. They're not sponsored, but there
If
is,
you're listening.
and you want to give me a shirt, that'd be cool. But there's also a museum in Hawaii had reached out, and
Yeah.
so almost every time I turn around, I'm there's another order. So it's been really overwhelming, and I
Yeah.
hope my publisher sees that and says, you know what,
And
even in these
agrees.
uncertain times, we're going to print this one.
Right. Well, I do just think it's worth celebrating that because like for all the hard work and research that you put in, it's just nice seeing other folks appreciate it as much as you did for the story.
Yeah. So if you have any interest in that, you can search Nick Pennsylvania up, and you will find my other books, which means you will also be seeing the very talented photography of Mr. Brendan
Yeah.
Bond, who has been
Yeah.
my photographer, except for one shot which my daughter took that's on the
Which
back
which
cover
is
of
a
another.
great photo too.
Yeah,
So
but
no.
yeah, both my front covers of my accordion books and a lot of the photos inside were all Brendan.
hmm Yeah. No, but yeah, I just wanted to shout that out real quick because I thought that was cool. And it's just again, it's nice to kind of get a win around something like that for all the research we all do. But we're gonna be delving into something far spookier tonight than Hawaiian steel guitar.
And far from the shores of
Yeah,
Hawaiian
of
Islands.
Hawaii, of the Hawaiian Islands, exactly. Yeah, we're staying relatively local for this one. So this is what we're gonna be talking about tonight is a Bigfoot, supposed Bigfoot encounter that is pretty fresh as far as Bigfoot encounters go. This is just from back earlier this year. This is from the reports come from February 19th of 2025, so just a few months ago. This was a story that kind of got put onto my radar through one of my friends who knows the kind of things that we are all into. And whenever they sent it to me, they were like, hey, have you seen this? And whenever I started looking at it, I realized I'm like, oh, me and Nick have fished right here on multiple occasions. I have a friend who works very close to this too, and like it was just very kind of close to home. So anytime you see a any kind of a paranormal report that is a place that you're, so familiar with, boy, it grabs you right away. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so Nick, do you kind of want to give us a little bit of a setup of where we're talking about and kind of the general area and kind of maybe our familiarity with it before we get into the actual report itself?
Absolutely. And in fact, I wanted to check the dates of this report first, real quick, because The one is in February of
Yeah, Feb.
2025, so
Yeah.
only a couple months ago from the time that we are
Hmm.
recording this. So, what's really wild is you had referenced a mutual friend of ours, well, a
Hmm.
couple friends of ours,
Yep.
and that they live nearby. I was having lunch with them just presumably a couple weeks
Right.
before this sighting occurred, which is pretty interesting too.
Hmm.
So not only have you and I been on these waters, but I've been on these waters with our good friend Aaron as well.
Yes.
And I know I've been on with Aaron. I think I may have been on the waters with Aaron and Pat together on a separate
Okay.
occasion. So this is water really well known amongst PA fly fishers because not
Hmm.
only is there a hatchery there, but it's really great water. I've been out on this water in the dead of winter.
Hmm.
So this is the Spring Creek. There's a trailhead, well, a trail, the Spring Creek. I have parked at the Spring Creek trailhead, which is where this person involved in the sighting also
Hmm.
was. And you can go from there, which is just above Lamont, Penn State, Trees, that area. It's right
Hmm.
next to the State College Regional Airport. So you and I, with our friend Matt, have let in at the Bellefonte State Fish Hatchery, and we've gone up and around the curve. We almost as far as Barnes Lane. I think that's where we came back out. But Aaron and I
Mm.
have almost walked right into Bellefonte.
Yeah.
Not quite that far, but we're talking about an area as the creek winds maybe 3 miles.
Hmm.
So
Right.
it's not a huge area. But what's interesting is the town of State College is a decent size. Bellefonte is a decent size.
Hmm.
But really, when you go between State College and Bellefonte, there's maybe 20 miles between there and Phillipsburg
Hmm.
and Clearfield's a little further down the road, yeah, but it is
Right.
very open.
It is.
And
Yep.
if you go north of 80, it really is a wilderness area. That's where Elk
Right.
State Forest is, Sprouse State Forest,
Hmm.
Susquehannock. This is near I mean, by a matter of a couple miles away from the Black Moss Shannon State
Yeah.
Park.
Black
So,
Machine, Bald Eagle's relatively close.
yeah.
Yeah, there's,
So one of the things that's really wild about this Spring Creek area is one,
hmm.
yes, the fishing's great, but you're never really that far from anything because you could walk to the giant super center. You could
Right.
walk pretty easily into the big town of Bellefonte, which is the county seat of Center
Hmm.
County. You could really easily walk to Sam's Club,
Yep.
which is less than a mile or maybe 2 miles
Walk
away.
up the windy road, there's a Sheets up there.
There's
So
a
it's like, yeah.
Sheets. There's a clover leaf. Like
Right.
you're never really you
Hmm.
can always hear the highway because Route
Right.
99 runs kind of parallel to it as best it can. So it's a really interesting place because
Yeah.
it's butted up against the highway. It's wedged between some
Hmm.
sizable towns with some real populations,
Hmm.
but then you go east, or rather you go west, and then you go especially north of
Hmm.
there, and it really is a very open area.
Right.
Now, the stories you're about to tell, I have opinions on, and
Hmm.
they're not of the believing kind, but let's hear the stories because
Right.
maybe you'll tell it in such a way, maybe you will bring up things that make me
Hmm.
reconsider some of my attitudes that I have
Your
coming into this.
inclinations. Yeah. Well, I think this is an interesting story for a few reasons. One, because we know the area so well. But two, this is one of those stories that really does take, whether this is a good or bad thing from a credibility standpoint, it has all of the beats that you expect in a modern supposed Bigfoot encounter, both from a flesh and blood standpoint, but also from the kind of weirder woo side of things. So I think it's an interesting one to talk about at the very least, and we'll get into some of our kind of conclusions around this afterwards. But there's kind of two sightings from one witness that we're going to kind of talk about here, and where we're getting all this information from is actually from a BFRO report that was done by a gentleman named Ben Cummings. Is it Cummings? Just Benjamin C. I'm not sure where I got the Cummings from, but Benjamin C. is a BFRO member and investigator. And one of the things I will say, we'll put a link to this actual report in the show notes. One thing I will say is the investigator takes a very thorough account from the witness and gives a lot of really good context in as far as the maps that they use and going into some of their own background, just kind of knowing the area. So I do kind of want to give credit where credit's due from a thoroughness standpoint, because you don't always see that with people who are investigating things. So overall, 9 out of 10 on thoroughness, which we don't see very often. So, like Nick said, we are just between State College and Bellefonte, right near Gamelands 333, right there along Spring Creek Rock Road. This first incident, there's two incidents. First one, the witness goes by the initials in here MK. That is not their name, and I don't even think nor their initials. That's just the pseudonym that they used. Get the impression this is a younger person, but who knows?
It does say they're a student.
It says they're a student, so I'm assuming they're a traditional student. But
right.
But either way, so this is MK. So what the report says is that MK has been going there specifically to this area for at least a month. And this first incident takes place on February 1st of this year, 2025. So that MK had been going there specifically for at least a month doing scouting for raccoon hunting, which is a type of like fur-bearing hunting we have here in the Commonwealth. He was there one evening. This is approximately 6:45 on February 1st. At this time, he had been going there for about a month just scouting, but this was the first time he was actually hunting for raccoons. So he'd come to the area around 6:45 raccoon hunt. Sunset occurred on this day at 5:29. Starts hiking up the Spring Creek Canyon Trail, which when you park down there, that's the path that we've been on, that Nick was mentioning earlier.
And I'm just gonna say too, it's very popular with casual walkers because it's a pretty well maintained trail.
Mm-hmm.
It's popular with people walking their dogs too.
Right. Yeah, it is it's a relatively well-maintained trail on both sides of the creek. There are some breaks where it does get really thick, especially on the east side of the one bend and the west side of the creek down south of Fisherman's Paradise, where it is pretty heavily forested, but it's maintained. Like people walk it all the time. Now, after dark, in February of this year, probably not too many other people walking on there, but this is a place you're allowed to hunt. So this person is doing this, legally and everything. Assuming they have a fur bearer's license. Not an unusual thing. So he starts heading up the Canyon Creek Trail and hikes in. He reports that relatively quickly, kind of out of nowhere, gets this feeling of dread and this feeling of being watched, which we've talked about many times with these types of encounters. But decided he was kind of already there, so he wanted to keep hunting. So he goes in, finds what appears to be an advantageous space, and sets up a call blasting decoy to call in raccoons. It's basically this little MP3 player with big speakers that you can play like the sounds of like raccoons fighting, and it in theory will bring in raccoons.
World Star.
Worlds, yeah, right. It's so he sets it up, starts doing his call blasting and everything. Now this canyon, because of how the trees are and everything, there's again, this is after dusk, but even though we're close to these highways and close to these cities and everything, I bet after dark in those canyons, it's probably really dark. You probably don't get a ton of ambient light.
Yeah, because the highway's up on the hill, the town's up on the hill.
Yeah.
I give you that. You're
Yeah.
still gonna hear it though.
Right. Yeah, you would. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's a dark night and everything. While he's doing the call blasting, because you're never at no point are you far from the creek in in this area. He hears what he refers to as like a pat 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 on the water. Like imagine someone going down to the creek and just kind of like almost like tapping the water with like an open palm, which is kind of like a distinct onomatopoeia, like pap pap pap.
Or
You
like a
know,
beaver.
or like a beaver tail. Yeah, exactly. Or like a beaver. But it's enough that it kind of apparently freaks him out. Because again, he did have this kind of like unexplained feeling of dread and feeling of being watched early on, which everyone who has hiked has had that. Like that's
I
it
was gonna
happens.
say something to that effect, but
Yeah.
it's at night.
Yeah, it's
I don't
I
know if he's usually with another person on these hunts. It's usually a
mhm.
good idea.
Especially yeah, hunting at night. Yeah, hunting you should just be safe, people. But yeah, but what I'm saying is I can understand. I can completely put myself in the headspace of being a little freaked out by hearing a sound you're not used to. Because he
Absolutely.
has been, in his defense, he has been scouting this area for a while previously. So it's not like this is an unknown place
No,
that he's at the
but is
first
this
time.
his first time at night? And
Right.
is this his first time there at night alone? These are
Alone.
questions I
Right. We
have.
just don't know.
The bottom line is I'm in complete agreement. I don't think there's anything exceptional about these feelings. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Um, so he hears this enough that he gets freaked out and decides to leave basically. Again, discretion the better part of valor. I can understand that. While he's leaving, he does have a spotlight with him. It doesn't say if it's a like regular like flashlight or if it's a red flashlight for like preserving night vision or if it's a scope mounted spotlight like some predator hunters use. It doesn't say. But either way, he shines his flashlight after hearing something on the other side of the creek and sees what he calls a black silhouette disappear into the brush. So sees something that he doesn't quite understand. That's large and doesn't doesn't kind of know what he's looking at. So kind of hightails it out of there. Gets back to his vehicle, gets everything in the trunk, and starts to leave. After starting to go, he stops again right at the Shiloh Road hatchery, which we were mentioning earlier, because he realized his phone he had left in his vest pocket from his hunting vest that was in his trunk. As someone who hikes and fishes, I leave my phone in my gear all the time. So I've literally done this move where you get 30 feet up the road and you're just like crap. I have to go dig through my stuff again. So I can relate to MK in that moment. So he stops, gets out, goes into his back of his vehicle, gets his phone, and as he's in the process of doing that, he says a small stone hits the ground near his feet and kind of skids under the car. Um, it's a small stone. We don't know if that's golf ball size, pebble size, what, but it's enough that it really freaks him out. He quote dives back into the car and peels out. Which again,
Ah,
that's
no. He was listen, I'm not being rude. You freaked yourself out, you psyched
yeah,
yourself out. There could have been a multitude. You probably kicked that rock yourself and didn't realize it. You freaked yourself out. I've done it. I've done it
yeah. Oh,
walking
I
home through the cemetery late at night as a
do it all.
kid. A rabbit ran out. I
Yeah,
nearly died of a heart
yeah,
attack at
yeah,
14.
yeah. I've been there too. It's for far less things than that even. So I can relate to MK. But so that's his first supposed incident where he had some unexplained feelings and saw something that he didn't quite understand and possibly had another element to the encounter. So again, that's on February 1st. Now, the second, little more substantial incident happens later that month on February 19th. So this is the south side of the game lands off of Rock Road. So the other end of the canyon, almost, from where the first incident took place. But again, like you mentioned, Nick, when we say other end of the canyon, we mean like 2-3 miles difference. Not
Yeah.
not terribly far.
No.
So he parks off of Rock Road and he dons some waders and crosses the creek over into the forest and the other side of the woods. Because again, you're never far from the creek here. So again, finds an advantageous location, sets up to do call blasting, has no action really right there. So he starts to find a new spot, finds some game trails, and decides to follow them, which he's a small game hunter at this point, so seems like a reasonable idea. Finds a nice stand of pines that he thinks looks really good. And again, you can see them on like the satellite and everything. You can see right where these pine trees are next to this one rock face that they talk about in the report. So he's in there, and apparently he gets spooked out a bit again, and decides to head out after just a small period of time. As he's walking back out, he hears your kind of classic wood knock right near the side of the trail where he's going. Takes out his spotlight, starts scanning the forest, doesn't see anything, decides it's time to, get out of Dodge, starts heading back down the trail even quicker, and he says he hears something paralleling him in the brush from the area that he heard the previous quote unquote wood knocks. Has his spotlight out and finally catches a glimpse of something ducking behind a tree. Now, at this point, I'm going to switch to just straight up reading the report. I'm going to read these few paragraphs because I think they're just an interesting to quote on their own without any of my exposition.
Sounds
So,
good.
at this point, MK took out his cell phone and called a close friend who was an ROTC student at Penn State and pleaded with him to get his AR-15 and get out here, further telling his friend that he was stuck in the woods and something big was following him. MK said that his ROTC friend laughed at first, only to shortly realize that the witness was serious and something potentially dangerous was actually going on. At this point, MK estimates he was about 100 yards east-southeast of the right angle bend in the creek. The thorn bushes along the bank of the river at this location formed a choke point, and if he had to push forward, the brush would act as a turning obstacle and force him to go deeper into the forest in order to keep going. He did not want to turn back in the direction of the noises or whatever was following him. He was facing south, with his shotgun in one hand, spotlight in the other, and cell phone in his vest pocket set to speakerphone. He was still talking to his friend at this point, and he scanned the forest again with his spotlight. Turning partially to his left, he caught the creature dead in the face. Quote, it was roughly 40 yards away. MK described the face as looking roughly like the face of King Kong from the most recent 2024 movie, with some differences. The nose was sharper, it was not super wide or flared. The skin color of the face appeared to be a medium gray surrounded by wispy, light gray hair. It had a pronounced brow ridge with defined cheekbones and sunken eyes. The mouth was thin-lipped and closed. The jaw appeared not sharp like a human's, more rounded, blocky chin. MK did not see any ears, he did not see any major eye shine, but thought he could see a glimmer of reflection in his spotlight in its eyes. The top of the head was not cone-shaped, but rather sloped back and rounded, similar to a human. The creature had a tuft of hair on the top and the head had a receding hairline. The witness stated that it looked like a middle-aged balding man in describing the hair on the head. He could not describe the hair on the body of the creature other than dark. He could not tell how long the hair was either. He did estimate the facial hair of the creature to be approximately 2 to 3 inches. MK estimates it was over 7 feet tall. He could not fully see the body as it was partially hidden behind a pine tree. It was holding onto the tree with its left arm, with the right arm pulled back and holding onto the back of its upper leg, seemingly trying to minimize its profile. Of the parts of the upper body the witness did see, he described it as massive, stating, "Take the biggest bodybuilder you have ever known in your life and double that." The upper arm and shoulder were massive. The trapezius muscles were huge, seemingly coming up to just under the ears and having no observable neck. This creature was absolutely jacked, quotes. The witness was able to view the creature for only about 2 seconds before it swiftly pulled its head back behind the tree. At this point, MK was freaked out, telling his friend on speakerphone that he saw something move behind a tree. MK was now terrified, so he pressed back against the thorn bushes and forced himself backwards through the entangling brush to get to the creek. He was relieved that he didn't get, quote, didn't get torn up too bad. He hopped into the shallow creek, crossed the other side, crawled up the embankment to Rock Road, and then quickly walked back to his vehicle. That is the quote directly from the investigator.
Now, there's a couple things I want to say that suggest to me it's young. Some of the story is just kind of goofy, for lack of a better word. Like calling up your friend, you're holding a gun.
Yeah.
You're holding a gun. Do ROTC people use ARs? You're claiming to be a gun person, and your point of reference is an AR, which is more, I think, of a media-driven popularity thing because of terrible
Hmm.
things that have happened.
Yeah.
I don't think hunters are thinking that way. I
It's a
mean,
weird
this
element.
is really me being like really putting a lot of conjecture into all of this, but it's just
Hmm.
something that's weird. It
It's a
would
weird
be
element.
like me being like, "Man, I need to get out of this joint fast. Brendan, I need you to pull up in your Camaro because that's like the fastest thing there is and drive over here. I saw a plane. It was a stealth bomber. It's you know what I mean? I'm kind
It's a
of
weird,
reaching here a
yeah.
little bit. It's
Yeah,
just a
no, but I know what you
weird
mean.
thing.
But maybe,
Or
yeah,
be
like,
bring why would you specify?
yeah.
Why would you specify? Oh, hey, Brendan, I'm playing a gig. Can I borrow an amp? But I need it to be a class A, B, preferably like a 15 to 20 watt rated. Um, Not an
Well,
EL84 because I'm not English. Come
yeah,
on.
you're a LV, you're a 6v6 guy,
Well,
but
6v6, I prefer a 6L6, but we're
yeah.
talking again 15 to 20 watt rating here. We're not going to use the 6L6.
You know what? You know what, Nick? You actually turned me on this. I actually think that actually sounds more reasonable now because I feel like we've had that exact conversation.
Okay, fair enough. But it just
But
seems
I know
silly
what
to
you
be
mean,
like,
though. I know what you
listen,
mean.
calling a
Yeah.
friend is not silly.
Right.
Calling a friend, even though, yeah, they're probably going to take at least
Yeah.
15 minutes to 20 minutes to get wherever you at.
That doesn't make a lot ton of sense.
It
Yeah.
doesn't make a ton of sense. Saying,
But
listen, I'm really freaked out, bring a weapon makes more sense. To be
yeah.
like, hey, I need to bring that AR-15 down.
Right. So to play devil's advocate, because I'm really going to try and keep, keep the even keel here on this
You're much nicer than I am.
for the time being. So let's say, I mean, one, let's give the dude the benefit of the doubt. Say maybe he actually was scared, and you just don't do rational things whenever you're scared. You know,
That is a fair counter
um,
argument. I accept that.
like let's say you know a friend who lives just up the road, you know, kind of thing. And if he was raccoon hunting, he's probably raccoon hunting with like, you know, it's well, it actually says in the report he's using Remington 870, which is a 12 gauge shotgun. Which when people hear 12 gauge shotgun, they think, oh, that's a big gun,
12 gauge is bread and butter.
right?
Yeah.
But if he's going for raccoon, they're probably small game loads, which like again is still extremely dangerous.
Yes.
But
For
may
small game, when I was
yeah,
hunting more, I
yeah,
used a 410
yeah,
shotgun, just a
hmm
little bolt eye. Small thing. I used that for deer too, but I
hmm
used it with a slug.
right with the
So I would use a 410 or I would use a 28 double barrel side by side. We've
right,
talked about this before.
right,
Now,
right.
I haven't been hunting in years, but yeah, 12 gauge I think falls in
So
between those
yeah,
two options.
so like maybe he was just like, oh, I'm undergunned here, and that's the first place his brain went. I don't know, or maybe I mean I don't know. Yeah, we're obviously we're just kind of conjecturing at this, but like so when we look at like his actions and everything, I can kind of excuse a lot of like the weirdness basically just due to like people being scared. And let's say he is a kid, maybe he's a little self-conscious about being so scared and on the record,
Well, I
you
would
know,
say
and
too, to follow up with what you're
yeah,
saying, he is retelling this story to the person that
right.
is.
Yeah.
What? Whoop, I just dropped my notepad. But he is retelling this story too, so I could
Yeah.
imagine even a list being a little bit of braggadocio
Right. Just a
coming in and
little
being
bit.
like,
Yeah.
call my bro
Yeah.
up and I'm like, dude, you
Yeah.
better bring out that,
Call down the,
5Y. Yeah, I need a 5Y3 rectified. I'm
yeah.
preferably something with a two channel interactive. I know you're gonna say 5E3, but okay.
Yeah. If you call me and say, hey, Brendan, I need to call down the thunder.
Yeah.
Like I'm getting the Marshall JCM 900. I'm coming down.
Yeah, and
I don't
you'd be
ask
like, "Who
questions.
is this?" Because Nick
Yeah.
asking
Yeah.
for something British sounding, Be like, I thought
Oh my
you were gonna
God.
ask for like
We're
a '60s Sun head unit,
right.
probably,
God, we're such yeah.
getting a little in the weeds here. So, but
But
one of
it's
the other statements that I don't believe you did read,
yeah, because
this this
there's more in the actual report.
there
If
is a
anyone wants
little
to,
more,
yeah,
and
yeah,
again, it is very thorough,
it
and I
is very thorough.
appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Another thing that is said after the fact is that MK has had trouble sleeping. Now, if
Yes.
I had anything half so much as this, I can totally understand.
Right.
However, in that he says, this, that, and this other thing happened. I wasn't half so scared. One of those things he says is that he had been shot at intentionally by other
Which,
hunters.
yes.
Now, okay, you're
That's
just
a yeah.
that's a tall thing. Now, okay, I have
Yeah.
heard from credible people where there has been a standoff in the woods where
That stuff happens. Yeah.
a guy, well, not like a standoff like guns are held, like it's the
Yeah.
old west, but
Yeah.
one story I remember, one of my dad's very good friends who I used to go hunting with, a super guy. You've actually met him before, but um, a really super guy. He, I'm trying to remember the specific how I heard, but it was basically this, a close friend of his,
Mm-hmm.
and they were retelling the story to my dad and myself at a pancake breakfast many
Mm-hmm.
years ago in Jefferson County. This friend of his had been out and he had shot this deer and he had tracked it. Not, I mean, not very far, maybe a couple hundred yards. He never left his sight.
Mm-hmm.
But another man and his kid came out and they claimed the deer. And that was a tense standoff.
Oh,
And
that's yeah.
eventually this, acquaintance of ours said it was very tense, it was very weird, and I didn't know this man. And
Yeah.
so I said, you know what? It's theirs. I'm going to back away
Right.
because
You
this
just leave.
guy,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Yeah. It's because at that
Everybody here is
point.
armed.
Right, exactly. Well, and it's funny. They even like in the game commission's book for that you get with hunting
Yeah.
every year when it talks about like stuff like that. It literally says like if someone argues with you, like give them the deer. Like it's
It's not
like
worth
yeah,
it.
like yeah, it's not worth it. Like give them the deer. Call the warden, but like
It's
don't.
it's almost like what they say when you're driving. It's not
Yeah.
you, it's the all the other drivers that you have to be worried about. So
Right. Right.
to that, so
Hmm.
when someone claims that they have been shot at intentionally,
Yeah.
that's a little much for me.
Well,
It's
and you have.
not impossible,
Hmm. Oh,
but
so
it's a
certainly not
little beyond
impossible.
the pale.
Yeah, it's certainly unusual. It's a weird thing to just kind of like mention and then not act like probably some trauma associated with that maybe hasn't been addressed.
Now, it could also be that
But
if because I knew myself, I still
mhm,
know myself, but I think I
yeah.
know myself better. When I was a young man and I was excitedly telling a story
Hmm.
and someone said something or challenged something, I
Yeah.
could imagine myself in a moment of passion saying something really stupid like that.
Or like yeah, exactly. But so with his actual like encounter and everything, there's a lot of elements that we see coming up here that we've talked about numerous times with especially like the idea of a flesh and blood Bigfoot. Where and we again when we say that we mean the theory that a Bigfoot is a unrecognized by science North American wood ape. Like these are flesh and blood creatures that live here. And even the investigator mentions, like we said earlier, their proximity to Sproul and Moshannon and other places, that this is a great corridor for them to move through, at certain times of the year because they can get through a lot of really populated areas and remain hidden. Assuming that's the case, and this is an actual creature, um, the wood knocking we hear a lot with the paralleling while leaving an area, which I always think is super freaky. We hear that a lot. The idea that as you're leaving an area, they kind of walk you out, as a form of like as like a territorial stance. The pebble throwing from the first incident that MK mentions, that's again something we hear all the time in classic Bigfoot encounters. Them not just throwing. A lot of times people say, "Oh, it's rock throwing." It's like, well, it's not always rocks. A lot of times it's just these small pebbles to try and get people's either attention or freak them out or just kind of like trying to shoo him away. It almost feels like they're trying to shoo us away. And then whenever he describes how the creature looks, it's a very typical description. Whenever he says it looks like a middle-aged balding man, like that sounds very like unflattering. And with the more human sounding stories and accounts that we hear, it's usually how it is. It's usually like, hey, this thing like looked more person than ape, and like that's where you tend to draw the comparisons. Yeah,
Well, it's so much of the description up to a point sounds like
yeah,
just a person, maybe a big dude in the woods, maybe another
hmm,
hunter, maybe a poacher. That is a
yeah,
very real thing. But then you get on to Jack, largest
yeah, body,
bodybuilder
yeah,
you've ever seen. And
hmm,
that's where it's like, did that really happen? Or is that just your fear exaggerating something that you're
how big
seeing?
something is. Yeah,
Because you get that far, and then I'm like, this does not just sound like some encounter. This sounds a bit much.
right. Now, yeah, it sounds like a bit much. So you have to wonder how much of this is a real creature versus maybe not fabricated, but projected, as we've talked about with the. Now we're going to kind of switch to the kind of woo side of things. Let's say hypothetically this isn't a 7 foot, super massively jacked wood ape, but there is something stranger going on here that maybe this is a bit of a weird place that tends to have these kinds of encounters. Now, one of the things that I thought was really interesting that in because we've said how thorough this investigator Benjamin has been in the initial like log that MK puts in when he's talking about other things that he noticed, he puts in here, and I saw a ball of blue light moving through the woods. In the 3,000 words that follow, not one mention of a blue light. So
That's curious
it's
because,
curious. Yeah.
yeah. And again, this is one of those things that if, we've talked about sometimes too much is happening.
Right. Well, is
How are
it
these things related? Are
right?
they?
Well, and again, that's where I think the perspective of the investigator comes in. And we see this happen with lots of different kinds of cases, where BFRO folks are generally speaking big into the flesh and blood hypothesis with Bigfoot. Again, a lot of this sounds like a real creature in the woods, and you can understand why someone would come to that conclusion. However, if you take a little more of the paranormal side of it, we do see lots of correlation between Bigfoot sightings and light phenomena in the woods. Just like we've talked about with ghost lights and will o' the wisps. They tend to, if not occur at the same time, they tend to occur in the same spaces. So it's weird that out of the 3 sentences that he provided in his initial thing, his initial entry, that wasn't followed up on. That was not followed up on because the investigator didn't ask or didn't put it in his final report, or did MK recant that part of it? Not sure. That is kind of up to speculation. I don't know if that makes it more or less credible, or if it makes it more or less interesting to people. But I think the idea of light phenomena in such a strange place makes more sense than not. I see what you're saying though with the like too much. That was one of the first people I showed this account to. That was kind of their first reading of it, was like, does it check all the boxes because it really happened, or does it check all the boxes because like those were all the boxes available to this person?
Yeah, and I mean, if I'm going to subscribe to something, I'm going to subscribe to the flesh and blood thing. And so when you're
Hmm.
talking about something this massive in
Right.
size that it's really put forward, I have a really hard time believing that it's there in such a populated place. Now, that's in the face of me saying
Hmm.
that north of there is very sparse.
Right.
It's just for it's just too much for me to believe that. The light thing I think is more interesting,
Hmm.
but I don't know. What do you make of the light thing beyond it's just stating its appearance here?
Right. Yeah, it's tough. So one of the things I think that does kind of help too. The investigator says that he did live in this area. The investigator I'm talking about now did live in this area for 2 years. So that, like, again, it seems like a very thorough investigation, and I give him, Benjamin, all the credit in the world on that. Again, like 9 out of 10, 99%, kind of thing. There's a lot of questions I would have still asked MK if I was in this situation. This being near State College, there are other reports in the area. There was another Class B, which again is like just auditory, that happened just back in 2019, around the same time of year, March 6th. This one was also knocking that was heard. We don't have a first name on this one, but again, another encounter, and again, another thorough investigation. We're not going to go through this whole one too, but basically other wood knocking in the area. So it's not like this is the first time there has been reported Bigfoot activity, so close to the fish hatchery here in State College. So those are kind of my thoughts on it. I think it's a really, again, thorough story. I think these two incidents have a lot of things about them that we would expect in a lot of kind of modern Bigfoot encounters. Whether that is a good thing for credibility or a bad thing for credibility, really, it's speculation. It's hard to say one way or the other, obviously. One thing I will add is apparently this witness has since been on the podcast Sasquatch Chronicles, which is not one that I listen to or support currently. But if any of you out there have heard this might be the second time you're hearing about it, because apparently someone else has already covered this, which is understandable. It happens with a lot of these cases, especially ones that have this much to talk about with them, not unusual. But again, that's something that will probably hurt credibility for some listeners and maybe help for others. And, that's kind of the fun of talking about all this stuff, in my opinion. So yeah, Penn State Bigfoot. Any other thoughts on that one from your side, Nick?
No, it is really cool though to hear these stories that are, again, we led. It's just we've been there together. We've been there with other friends. It's a place where I'm not going to pretend like I'm super familiar, but the moment I started reading it, I could picture exactly where he was. Yeah, it's a place I've been to at least once a year for
Right.
8, 9, 10 years. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's a cool element of it. Did this person see something? Maybe. I think it's a mistaken identity if there was something that was seen, and I think the fear and shock and everything may have inflated the story to where it is.
Possibly, yeah.
Innocently enough, but beyond that, I'm just not buying it as a Bigfoot type thing. I just think there's too many people. We're talking essentially a community park that's between two larger communities, and then it's on the edge of a game lands, and that I don't know. I feel like if there were creatures this size, they'd be getting hit by FedEx trucks periodically along Route 80 or 99.
That is true. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting, and I think that at the very least, this is a fun one to talk about. And if you're anyone who is in the area, even if you're not a fly fisherman, it's such a pretty area. Like, go check out the hatchery, go check out Fisherman's Paradise. They have stuff there for folks to do. There's a nice little picnic area. If you time it right, you get to see, brown trout fighting over each other to get upstream and everything. And
we saw them redding that one time.
Yeah.
That was crazy.
It's just really cool. Yeah, it's
really cool.
It's a beautiful area. Even if you just go and just hang out there for a little bit, whether you're there for fly fishing, for Bigfoot, for ghost lights, for raccoons, whatever. Really, as long as you're getting out there, it's probably a win. So that, I think we could all agree, is a good thing. So if you have a story you'd like to share with us, or if you have a report you'd like us to look into, you can find us, as always, on Instagram and YouTube, or you can send us an email at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com.